we're stuck into this really vicious cycle where we have privileged the car so that it's the fastest way to get anywhere. And basically, the only people who are taking public transit either live in the exact right places, or more likely, they're forced into this because they're either too young, too old, too poor, or too disabled to drive. And that is over half the district. This time tax metric basically shows the injustice, and it shows us a way to get out of this vicious cycle towards something more virtuous.
Welcome to Non-Driver.
Real stories of navigating our world from people who can't drive.
I'm Anna Zivarts.
And I'm Devin Silvernail.
We have an exciting guest today. I met Karthik, in Washington, D.C. And I remember when we first met, I think you and your partner arrived on Bromptons. And so immediately I was intrigued as a fellow Brompton bike owner. Karthik Balasubramanian, hopefully you're going to correct me on that last name pronunciation, but grew up in Ohio, drove everywhere, and was diagnosed with a degenerative eye condition around age 20. He stopped driving at 24 after returning from Tanzania, moved to Seattle, then Boston, before settling in D.C., where he is a professor at Harvard University. He began advocating in 2018 after experiencing driver hostility on his bike commute, got involved in local advocacy work, and now chairs DC's Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council, a role he took on specifically to counter the bad faith use of disability arguments against transit and bike infrastructure. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Anna.
So do you want to start just by telling us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, and sort of what that transition from being someone who could drive and probably didn't anticipate not driving, right, to a non-driver?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Ohio in the Cincinnati suburbs, and I was trying to think. I don't even think our subdivision had sidewalks, but it was just kind of a foregone conclusion. Basically, the only way that you could get around was to have a car, and I never questioned that at all. Like, growing up, we had moved actually when I was probably 12 or so. But before that, we lived in a place that was older and did have some sidewalks, and there was a little cut through to get through our neighborhood to get to the recreation center. And that's actually there's a whole lot of kids in our neighborhood that we would all kind of rove around in bike gangs, and it was wonderful. But then in the new place, I don't think there were sidewalks, and I also got older and got my first car when I was 16 and just started driving everywhere. Then I was in college, and then I started to see that when I was in class, I started to not be able to see the board, and my sisters had been diagnosed with Stargardt's macular degeneration earlier, so it was not a surprise when I got diagnosed as well. And yeah, then basically slowly realized, hey, I need to wean myself off of the car. But it took me a while. I was in North Carolina at the time, and again, kind of it's basically not possible to get anywhere. I did have a bike on campus, and that was quite useful. But really, to go anywhere, groceries or anywhere off campus, you had to have a car. And yeah, when I was 24, I just kind of realized, oh man, it is definitely time. I'm no longer able to operate this thing safely. And that actually coincided with a move to Tanzania, where I definitely didn't drive. I did have a bike there, and that was quite useful. I then from there moved to Seattle, and that was cool. As just telling Devin that often Seattle brought me to this, brought out the runner, biker, hiker in me, and started running to work, and also biked a lot to work. But I still, not really questioning the dogma of car of uh, or just car dependence in general, and all kind of street design, nothing. Like it was just, oh, this is nice, there's a bike lane here, or oh, this is nice, there's like a nice sidewalk here. I don't think it was just, I think just subconsciously is like, oh, this is a nice place to be, or oh, this is an unpleasant place to be. And I think I was pretty, just a casual, I was certainly not an advocate at that time. Um, I was there for a couple of years, and then I moved to Boston, where I was there for 6. And still kind of same way. I was, it was a Boston and Cambridge are pretty, like, especially in the places where I was, pretty walkable. I was on campus for grad school, and pretty walkable and bikeable. So again, wasn't really, kind of same way as like, oh, I really like, the Esplanade. I really like these, like, long, long bike trails. Those were super nice. And I really appreciated them, but I definitely kind of was not radicalized at all. It was only in 2018 when we moved to DC. My partner Ashton, she had done a master's in city and regional planning at UNC, and she had studied land use, and also there were transportation people there. So like that's where it's kind of started to percolate. Like, oh, there's like some like our land use is super messed up in the country. And why is big chunk of why the land use is super messed up in our country is because we basically paved over a whole lot of great old infrastructure in order to make room for roads and parking lots and just in general car infrastructure, coincided with kind of single family zoning, all of this messed up stuff. So that was kind of percolating in my head. And then when I got here, we bought for the first time. When we bought here, it basically like, there's some mindset shift where it's like, okay, well, this is where we're going to put roots down. And we started going to kind of our local advisory council or advisory neighborhood council meetings. And, we were just trying to think about how we could get involved. We learned that there was a bicycle advisory council and a pedestrian advisory council, and we started going to those meetings. And that coincided with me, there's a way for me to take the metro, but it is faster for me to bike to work. And basically, as I started biking, it's just like, this is garbage. Like, I'm the most direct way. There were sharrows on the street, on 7th Street in Washington, D.C. There's sharrows. But I would get honked at by Maryland drivers. So then I started getting involved, like, in the bicycle advisory council. And then, there's a fight over a protected bike lane in our neighborhood that we started to get involved into. And then that's when I started to hear these bad faith arguments of, oh, what about people with disabilities? So it's like, oh yeah, what about people with disabilities who can't drive? And actually the majority of people with disabilities who don't drive. And then, realized my leverage point was making that specific argument, and basically forcing people to confront that, DC is built for drivers who don't live in DC. And we really need to change that if we really care about DC residents, especially DC residents with disabilities.
It's really interesting because there's so many people who, whether they're non-drivers or they're people who choose to take public transportation or walk or whatever, or even people who drive, that get unhappy or angry over the state of things, but then don't necessarily know where to find an outlet for that anger. And so I'm curious if you feel like it was just kind of like a happy coincidence that you had started going to these advisory council meetings beforehand, or if it was apparent, beyond that you could have a place to put that energy.
Ash and I have talked about this. We also kind of radicalized each other. Like she started learning, and then we started learning together. We shared stuff to each other, and essentially we became more and more radicalized. And I don't know where, I think we probably would have come to it anyway. But it was there was a big enough community of people who were starting to question the status quo, or had been questioning the status quo for a long, long time. And I think we really benefited from that. Like basically people who had been doing the advocacy for such a long time. And then we started to learn all the terminology and, road classification and all the ins and outs of like the, DDOT or District Department of Transportation's design and engineering manual. And, like some of the past fights we started to learn from those, like, it was really like on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of people who kind of fought a long time for this to happen. And I think now finally a lot of things are coming to fruition, but it's still a fight street, block by block.
I have to say, coming to DC, and I know the grass is always greener, right, in other cities, and my experience of DC as someone who comes in for work meetings, a couple times a year, is not the same as someone, in Seattle. I live outside of the core, and there's no bike infrastructure, and I'm sure that I would probably have the same experience in DC. But like the core of DC feels so bikeable and so transit rich. And I think, I'm always intrigued by people, because we have people from all over the country coming and living and working in this really very, very multimodal environment, what kind of impact that has on, say, congressional staffers from other states that don't have that little like petri dish of like, this is what it could be. And then I think the other really intriguing thing for me too about the DC politics is like, DC is a very small geographic area and political, area in the context of like Maryland and Virginia, right? Like, and so most of the people coming in are not even in the same state, or they're not in the same state. And that's sort of like, how does DC get to control what happens on DC streets? And I've heard like, stories about those DC not being able to enforce speeding tickets, right? Because people just leave these fines and fees unpaid because there's no sort of, infrastructure to support that. It's sort of unique, right, in the country,
Yeah.
right? As a not state, but as a place that has all this density. What are some of the challenges of doing advocacy in that environment?
There are a lot of different federal entities that, have various jurisdictions over, like the architect of the Capitol has been blocking like a connection to the, one of our core bike trails for a long time because they want parking. So they control a set of land. Then the White House, the premier cycle track goes through the White House grounds, but they shut it, they close it quite a bit. And so that is like out of the control. And then there's a whole system of NPS. NPS owns a ton of parks that they've neglected for a long time. But then they also, because they have jurisdiction, all of that needs to go through NPS.
And NPS, sorry, is National Park Service?
Sorry,
Okay.
National Park Service. Yes.
Yeah.
And DDOT is the District Department of Transportation. Stuff can get nationalized too, because we don't have representatives in Congress, no senators, and only one non-voting delegate. And we're subject, there was I think it's 1973 Home Rule Act, where basically Congress could disapprove of anything DC does, and also has kind of essentially veto control over DC's budget. There are shenanigans that Congress can engage in that really like mess with us, and could mess with us. Luckily, kind of, we've only seen that a couple times in DC's history, but that is like a real obstacle. And in fact, right now, there's a lot of sensitivity around, we can't push too hard because congressional Republicans will try to screw us even harder. Those are some of the negatives. The main positive is that because DC is so geographically compact and critically, it's a city and a state in one. Like DDOT, like, once you, like, in theory, it's the same decision. There's no two levels. So it's the same decision makers that like you can press over and over, and you can start to get to know them too. And you start to see a lot of good people trying to do good work. But then, politics, both internally to DDOT and also like, externally from council or the mayor, start to, mysteriously, figure out ways to cancel projects that have, people have poured blood, sweat, and tears into. But you can advocate like pretty effectively for like individual streets, and you're getting into you can get stuff, analysis and petitions and advocacy to the right place. They will hear you. and you can testify directly to city council. There's a performance oversight hearing and a budget oversight hearing um, every year. And then there are these various councils, the Pedestrian Advisory Council, Bicycle Advisory Council, and the Multimodal Accessibility Council, like where like we can interface directly with DDOT, DPW is the Department of Public Works, Metropolitan Police Department, like all of those folks, like because it's both a city and a state, like you're basically like you're able to be heard by the decision makers, whether they actually listen to you or not. That's another thing. But like you can get directly to them, and that is a very powerful thing.
That's very unique too, because I think about, Anna and I, we've had this fight in Seattle, right, where you can do something or you can try to do something at the city level, and then of course you can't really supersede state law. For example, setting a speed limit, you can't really necessarily go below 20 miles per hour on most roads in the state, even if you wanted to. I think maybe that might have recently changed, but in my time that was a problem. And so that does kind of give you a little bit of leverage. And we also, a lot of places have these kind of advisory committees as well. And speaking from experience, I've served on 2 different advisory committees in 2 different cities, and it feels like they were kind of touted as this engagement tool, but also felt really ceremonial unless you pushed for the work to happen. I was curious if it feels that way, or if it actually does feel more connected, because DC is kind of a little bit more connected in that sense.
Yeah, it is definitely can, and by default is ceremonial. 100%. Coming to the Mac is just like, it had been a place where basically people came, and then and they would give perfunctory feedback, and it was more like a checkbox. But for us, like we've got a couple other folks who are really excellent, and we basically said, hey, like there are things that make the network of our road network actively hostile to people with disabilities. And one thing that we chose was daylighting. So DC has laws on the books which make it illegal to stop or stand or park within 25 or 40 feet, depending on exactly how it's configured, of an intersection or mid-block crosswalk. And there are signs all over the place that violate that and allow people to violate that. They actually point people, they're 2-hour parking like signs that say you can park here, or there are road markings that say you can park here. And that is wildly bad, because we have these laws in place for a reason, so that people don't get injured or killed by people who are driving, who can't see them because of parked cars. And we kind of cited DC statute. We wrote a super well researched letter, and we took pictures, and we sent a letter to DDOT, and they blew us off essentially. We have been testifying about like this failure at performance oversights hearing year after year. And then this year we created a site called dangerousdc.org, where we basically put all of the pictures and a description of the law that was being violated by DDOT, that DDOT's illegal signs, and also the 311 tickets that we filed and the status of those tickets. And we put it all on. There's like 20 of them on right now. And it's basically saying like, this is like an external mechanism for us to say, hey, we've done all of your checkboxes. We've sent DDOT letters. We've filed 311 requests. Like, we're not asking you to do something special. We're asking you to just follow the law. And that is where essentially now, like, we have this, and we've been beating it, and we will continue to beat it for years until this is done. Because this is the law. We've now essentially demanded that we're interacting at the director level. Like, we have DDOT director come. We've got the DPW, the Department of Public Works director coming. We've got the director of for hire vehicles coming. Oftentimes you'll get ignored until you just basically just keep beating the drum.
Do you worry because these are appointed councils that you're going to get booted for pushing as hard as you are? Or do you think that you all have, like, you've built enough political power where that would be unacceptable for them to even consider?
I mean, it might happen. Like, and if it does, it does. But I'm not saying anything to be mean. I'm saying things, and we're doing things because they need to get done. Like, this is like people's ability to live, like just live their lives and move around the district without like getting, killed or injured, or just, it takes 2.5 times longer to get anywhere, on public transit than in a car. And that's terrible in so many in so many dimensions. Like, this is totally unacceptable, especially in a transit-rich environment like DC. Something called the Transportation Equity Network that I got involved in through DC Families for Safe Streets, which is a phenomenal group that basically advocates for safer streets. And yeah, we were basically trying to distill what our vision was for the district. And that vision was basically a place where you are not disadvantaged because you don't drive. So there's this metric, it's not anything new, but this metric, I think it's called the transit time ratio. Sometimes it's called the competitiveness ratio, but basically it's going from point A to point B. How long does it take for you to drive there versus how long does it take you to take public transit there? And basically what we did was we split up the district into what are called advisory neighborhood commissions. And we basically took the geographic center of all of them to all of the other advisory neighborhood commissions, calculate both the drive time and the transit time, and then find a ratio. And essentially that ratio was 2.5 times on average. And it could have been, in some places, it was bad as 8. And basically what that means is that in the district, even in the transit-rich environment in the district, including metro and metro rail and metro bus, it takes 2.5 times as long for someone who doesn't drive to get from point A to point B than someone who does drive. And I wrote a piece with Kai Hall, who is the coordinator of the Transportation Equity Network. We named this thing the time tax, and because it was basically the tax on the time of people who don't or can't drive. And essentially, if you really drill into it, what this is saying is like all life is just like a sequence of chunks of time. So if we're saying that one person can get there 2.5 times faster, what you're saying is the life of a driver is worth 2.5 times more than my life. So that's part one. The second part of the metric, why we like this, is that even for drivers, the fact that it is faster to drive than public transit, even for them, it's bad. Because if you have to drive, then everyone else driving makes your life worse off. It causes congestion for you. So you want the person who's driving currently in front of you, you don't want them driving. You want them to be opting in for public transit. You want them taking the bus or metro rail. And so it's actually, we're stuck into this really crappy, negative, vicious cycle where essentially we have privileged the car so that it's the fastest way to get anywhere. And basically the only people who are taking public transit are either live in the exact right places or more likely are captive riders, in the sense that there's no other, they're forced into this because they're either too young, too old, too poor, or too disabled to drive. And that is over half the district. This time tax metric basically shows the injustice, and it shows us a way to get out of this vicious cycle towards something more virtuous.
For folks, who are stuck in the daily grind, in our cities, wherever we are in the world, trying to make things a little less car dependent, what motivates you and gives you hope?
It's the community. Like, you're not alone. There are people everywhere who face this issue. And I think, and there are people who have like very successfully done stuff. Like, I mean, Week Without Driving was like such a cool idea, and now it's like grown. And it was so cool to be a part of that. And then also start to see like everyone else who are, who's doing this work. So I think it's really kind of like, there's enough of a community there, a kind of also a little of, bit of a YouTube addict, and there's like such good, content of people just, making these arguments and making great content showing like, hey, this is like, this is what a protected bike intersection looks like, and this is how it functions, and this is, why, this is, or even all the public transit stuff of like, this is like gold standard BRT, or and now I'm super involved in advocating for BRT in the district. And I think it's just like, feeling like you're part of something bigger. And then I think one thing that I realized too is, like it's easy to get discouraged because you look at this and it's like, oh, there are like 18 different ways or 18 different projects that were on the books and then they got canceled for some dumb reason, or you're getting blown off. But I think the thing that I realized is that like all this, eventually, if you stick with it, like nobody's in power forever. Like if you find an issue and focus in and just like basically don't let go, it will always work. Like something, like you will find a way to make a difference. It won't be the grand vision, like things are never as bad or as good as you hope or worry that they will be. But as like if you just like hone in on something, basically don't let go, you are guaranteed to make a difference. Like this is gonna sound dumb, but like like we were in the right place at the right time, and we advocated for a crosswalk, and there's a crosswalk because we have it, because we were in the right place at the right time, and we said something to the right person at the right time. And daylighting, like finally after 4 years, like they've gone through dangerous DC. I think they've like finally got embarrassed enough because we made this site. And they're going to go through and fix all that. Like they're going to move all the signs, they're going to move all the road markings. It might take a year and probably won't, like it's definitely not going to be like in the next couple of months, but I'm pretty confident that they're actually going to fix all of these things. And we're going to continue to point this out. And now that we have precedents, this established a precedent where they will be responsive to like admitting, hey, this is illegal and we are going to fix it. And that's cool.
Crosswalk is a crosswalk, And there's something about a physical thing. You're like, yes.
Small victories are big victories in any kind of organizing, right? And I mean, I think that like you should embrace that, and you're right. I think that not only does it set precedent there, other advisory committees that are part of the DC city government, I think that they can look to you as well and see that they're also not sitting on ceremonial committees, that maybe we will have some residents who are living in DC as well and looking to get involved. Is there a way that they can come and get involved with the Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council or any of the other work that you're doing?
We meet the second Wednesday of every month at 5:30. macdc.link/meeting is how you join. So yeah, Eddie, like you're totally welcome. Even if you don't live in DC, come hang out with us. Folks should absolutely feel welcome to come. Please come, especially if you're interested in this stuff. But then, yeah, there's the Pedestrian Advisory Council, the Bicycle Advisory Council. They also meet monthly. There's the Washington Area Bicycling Association. There's DC Families for Safe Streets. There's GG Greater Washington. That's the blog with the now both 501c3 and 501c4 organizations. Yeah, just tons of ways to get involved. And also the Advisory Neighborhood Commission. That's another special thing about DC is there's hyper-local, not governance, but there are hyper-local representatives. So Ashton was an Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for a year here, basically representing 2,000 folks, which is like basically our building and a couple other buildings and a couple streets. And that is a way for folks to get involved.
Awesome. And if people, you want people to find you or your work on the internet, or get in touch, do you want to be found? Do you want to share that?
If you Google greater or Gigi Wash time tax, or Karthik time tax, like you'll find it. This is my fervent hope, is that people will like start to like calculate this metric for themselves, and just, you can do it yourself. Just do a trip that you do often, look at the drive time, look at the transit time, and then take the ratio, and then you can find out how much more your city cares about drivers than you.
It sounds like a really good way for folks to maybe do some organizing in their own city too. So thanks a lot, Karthik. It was really cool to have this opportunity to talk to you today.
Keep up the good work for you guys too. I'm excited to see how this podcast evolves.
Thanks for listening to Non-Driver. I'm Anna Zivarts.
And I'm Devin Silvernail. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe and share the show with a friend.
You can also leave us a review wherever you listen. It genuinely helps other people find the show.
Non-Driver is brought to you by the Non-Drivers Alliance. Find more info at nondrivers.org.
And this episode was produced by Devin.
Want to get in touch? Email us at nondriverpodcast@proton.me.
We'll see you next week.